Hello, welcome back. You are watching Real News. This is Insight, the show where Warwick students get to give their opinions on all the biggest stories of the week, both on and off campus, although mostly off campus these days, because who is on campus? I'm your host, Ian McCungy, head of news here at Raw 12:51 AM. And today we're gonna discuss the all-student vote that occurred last week, with, I think, the longest list of motions I've seen in my time here, 9 motions, but with a smaller turnout than last term. We're going to discuss what that means for SU democracy and also what these motions mean for you as a student. Then we're going to discuss Keir Starmer, Labour's new leader, well, say new leader, not really new anymore. He's been trying to push a more visibly patriotic message for Labour. Is this going to work? We've seen a sort of slew of negative in comparative negative poll numbers for Keir Starmer, and maybe is this new message working out? And our final story today, we're going to discuss HS2 because who doesn't love a good discussion of HS2? Before we do any of that, let's bring in my wonderful panel, starting with Dave. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hi Enoch, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Dave, I want to ask a question. Is it snowing where you are?
Well, I'm in Leamington, so it was snowing a little bit this morning, but I think it's stopped now.
Because it's still snowing here in London. It's everything. It's sort of like a BTEC version of that snow day we had a few weeks ago. Snow days always wasted on a Monday when you have nowhere to go, isn't it? Rather than a Sunday where you can go outside and have fun.
To be fair, it is lockdown. Every day is the same, so just go out and have fun.
True, and yeah, that's true. Or alternatively, just for today, stay in and watch Insight. That's one alternative option.
That is the highlight of every Monday, isn't it?
Of course, it's my highlight. It's the only thing I do every Monday. Next up, Arthur. Welcome to the stream.
Arthur? Bonjour. Hello.
Arthur, is it snowing where you are?
It is snowing a bit outside. I think I'm also in London, so I've also got a slightly BTEC snow day.
What bit of London are you in right now?
North London,
yes.
Like the tip of Islington.
So. Only get a bit of London. Only bit of good of the UK, to be honest. No offense, all bits of the UK.
Yeah. As I say, it's getting slightly jingoistic, but
I mean, that's perfectly on theme then. Since we're discussing Labour and patriotism just in a bit, someone who's happy to be jingoist by his part of the UK. Cam Hall, welcome to the stream.
It's great to be here, Enoch. And I guess if you were going to ask me how the snow situation is, we had our first bit of snow this morning. We missed out the first time, so got a little bit of snow this morning, but literally a tiny little flutter. It's almost like the icing you put on top of a cake, almost a tiny little flutter, and it's all melted, which is really depressing.
So Gosport living up to reputation as the most depressing place on earth, I see.
I never said that. That's you who said that,
I feel like I've inferred it from you though. Like if I was doing a history essay about your comments on Gosport and I made that statement, it would definitely be considered valid.
You know what it is? It's when you grow up at a place. You secretly love this place so much where you grow up, but you love it to the point where you start to almost hate on it. It's like you've been married for 30 years and you've reached the stage where all you can do is sort of just subtly make mocking comments all the time because it's got to that stage of 30 years of marriage. That's what it feels like with me and Gosport. I love it, but I'm not always always vocal necessarily.
So 20 years of living in Gosport is like 30 years of a bad marriage. I mean, I don't know what to say. It was really just laying it up for me. Right, let's get this show on the road then. Starting with the all-student vote. So this term's all-student vote had 9 motions, and 2,850 of you turned out to vote on "It's time to combat anti-Semitism," a motion promoting the international definition of anti-Semitism and asking SU to adopt it, just like university did this year. A motion on SU space for liberation officers. A motion to support student sex workers. A motion to have a review into sexual violence resource allocation, basically making sure that resources on sexual violence are more widely distributed among from the SU. A motion on sexual violence prevention training. A motion to try and promote all permanent staff members to get trained in how to prevent sexual violence on campus. Increased module feedback for students. Supporting the Warwick rent strike. Stopping the new A46 road. New expansion A46 roads, and of course, Warwick safety net. I want to ask everyone here: did you guys take part in this term's all-student vote?
No.
Yep, never missed the chance to take part in democracy.
I've always missed the chance.
Let's talk about then, Arthur. Why didn't you vote in this all student vote?
I didn't even know it was happening. I mean, 3,000 people is a lot, but how big is a student body at Warwick? Like at least 10,000, maybe 15,000. I mean, I don't think anyone I know, not that I have the hugest circle of friends, but not that anyone I know took part either, because it doesn't seem particularly consequential. Like, I don't think any of the motions you just mentioned are that controversial. Like, no one's going to vote against supporting student sex workers. No one's going to vote against a safety net. No, I mean, I'm looking at the figures now, like 140 people voted against it. It just seems like, listen, not to like, kind of belittle any of these causes, but it does feel like there is something. It does feel somewhat like a formality. It's just students saying, yeah, these are policies we want and obviously want, and we're going to tell the SU to pursue these things. Ultimately, the SU's power is limited to whether, I mean, as I found out just before, it's not binding. It's just, if it's not binding upon the union itself, it's binding upon the SU. But the SU is, it's not the university. It doesn't have the principal control. And also, just another thing, the Warwick SU stops for a 46 road. Like, what's the point? Is the Warwick SU going to stop a road being built? Maybe they have that much power, but it just seems a bit fantastical to me. But I don't know. I'm not, as you can tell, I'm somewhat disengaged. So feel free to tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone at home, please write in and tell us if you voted in this election and why you didn't and why you did. Cam, since you're so passionate about SU democracy, please tell us why Arthur is wrong.
I think it's important you get the opportunity to express your voice really on what you think on key issues. Now, I think for a lot of these motions, I think Arthur was right. A lot of these motions, I think you would have expected to pass, but still to put your opinion forward. I think there's nothing better in a democracy than when people have the opportunity to say how they feel. And, with some of these motions, there may have been a large minority that might have voted against. And that would have been an opportunity for the SU to say, well, this motion's passed, but again, we can sort of understand the temperature on these issues. Take the online teaching motion in term one, it resoundingly passed, by about 3/4. And I think one of the things that came from that was, students overwhelmingly wanted this, but there was still a large minority who didn't. And so we also have to kind of look at both sides. With this, it seems to be, certainly with most of the motions, that yes, they passed and they passed very convincingly, and the mood of students is very much on side with this. But it's important, you're part of the SU, you're part of the university. I see it as a chance to really get my opinion heard and to almost sort of know what everyone else is thinking. And that's really, to me, is the essence of a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, Cal, you mentioned that these motions seemed less contentious than last time. Obviously, last time, in fact, we discussed on the show how the sort of level of furor encouraged by the motion, online teaching motion, especially in places like Warwick Love. Dave, as someone on the ground, do you think there was a lot less contention around the motions this time? Or did that lead to the lack of voting we've seen compared to last time?
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't think there was anything especially controversial this time. As in, I don't think any of the motions were really contested by any of the big groups of students, to be honest. Like, looking at the student groups, I don't think there was any posts at all about any of the motions at all. I think it was literally a formality, really, of getting all these motions passed. And I don't think there was anything contentious. And I'm not surprised that the turnout was ridiculously low.
Yeah. Well, then, I guess this is sort of leading to another question. What can the SU do then to increase turnout without necessarily increasing the tempers, as we saw last time? Arthur, what would the SU have to do to get you to vote?
I mean, the thing is, I get the impression that all three of you are quite involved in the university kind of infrastructure and community and the societies. Well, and that's fine, that's fair enough. But I don't think that the SU really, I don't think there's a feasible reality where you get like 80% turnout, because I'd say I'm like towards the other extreme of just sitting in my room and not really engaging, apart from coming on radio shows eventually and like writing articles. But I feel like most people are in a middle ground where like they might attend a couple of societies, they might go to conferences occasionally, but most of them don't really live a life that's like so integrated into like all the university functions. So I think the SU vote, it kind of by definition caters to a niche of student population, which most students don't really care about, all the kind of most like engaged aspects of university experience. Most of us just spend time with our friends, sit in our houses, maybe go out a bit, go maybe attend one or two societies, do our work. Again, I'm being presumptuous, but that's what I would assume.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with being presumptuous on a radio show. I think that's the way to get a conversation. Got Cam, David, Dave, any idea you want to respond to what Arthur was saying there?
Well, I think sort of following from what Arthur was saying, I think for most students, their engagement they will have with the SU is with the copper rooms. It's with the commercial sites that they have with the SU. And obviously at the moment, that's not happening because of COVID. And I don't think many students, realize just how important getting involved in the democracy side of the SU is. I think the SU doesn't always help themselves. I don't think they don't promote the democracy side very well. For most students, they found out about the week of ASV usually on the couple of days before all student vote is taking place. And I think this year in particular, where we've had all student votes taking place in different weeks in both terms. Last year, I think they were consistently week 5 of all 3 terms. Last term, it's week 6, it was week 4 this week. I don't think it helps necessarily having that inconsistency. So I think there's a lot of potential. I think the SU has a lot of potential to engage students because fundamentally, a lot of the things that the SU can deal with, and indeed a lot of the things that the SU was dealing with in these motions were very much sort of the bread and butter, essential issues that are, central to students, experiences on campus. Take the sexual violence motions, for example. These are, things that students have really been voicing their opinions about and really been getting vocal about the fact that the university and the SU need to do more. These motions, they're a fantastic opportunity for students to come forward, vote for them and say, in large numbers, we want change. And I think with better promotion from the SU, I think more students will firstly know that this route exists, but I think more students will want to get involved, not just in these motions in the ASVs, but in a lot of the causes, in a lot of the key issues that are really central to students' university experiences. So I think there's a lot of potential that can be grasped, but I think you very much need to reach out to students, not necessarily just through emails or through Facebook, but I think really trying to find a way, whether that is maybe through a couple of posts on Warwick Sessions, or whether that is by going to individual societies, perhaps getting them to promote ASV, getting them to promote just how important it is to have their opinions heard. I think that really could do a lot.
Yeah, Dave, I want to ask you the same question. How can the ASU better get people engaged?
I think firstly, you should have less motions in one go. I think having 9 motions in one go was quite confusing for most people. And I think for some people it might have been a bit daunting having to choose on 9 motions. Secondly, I agree with Cam. I think that societies and students have to be informed on ASV a while in advance. For example, on Jewish Society, we were told literally about 3 days ago, we saw online that there's going to be a motion on anti-Semitism, which had passed a year ago. I think it was a bit disgraceful from the SU. It didn't give us more notice on it. Literally, we found out about 2 days before the voting opened. I think that I'm sure other societies have similar experiences. And if you're giving a few days' notice to societies which have a stake within it, then honestly, I don't know how the SU thinks there's going to be really big turnout on these issues, some of which are actually quite important.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned societies there. Let's talk about now in the spring elections this year. Societies can now endorse candidates for certain roles. Do you think that's something could be sent to ASVs in future, where societies can endorse certain motions? Is that something you could see happening? I would come to you, Arthur, but I know you don't particularly care, so I'll come to you first, Cam.
Possibly. I mean, one of the things we saw, or that has always kind of been done in the past, is sort of individuals acting of their own volition can choose, whether to endorse people or endorse particular motions at ASV. We didn't really see it in this term's ASV, but certainly in term 1, on both online teaching motion and the BDS motion in particular, you had a large range of people posting into the freshers groups endorsing both motions, and obviously in SU elections, we've seen people do it with candidates as well. So I think it's interesting. I think a lot of it has to do with promotion. I mean, that's the fundamental thing. Students need to know what's going on if they are if they're going to turn out. But I think a lot of it, particularly with societies, is a performing arts society or a sports society. Is it necessarily a good look for them necessary to be taking a certain stance on political motion? So I think you have to look at, I think a lot of things kind of feed into this. And I think it will depend a lot on the society. It will depend a lot on the individuals. But I think it just has to go to promotion more widely. I think that's what's most important to getting higher turnout.
Yeah. And all right, I will ask Arthur. Arthur, what do you think? Do you think society should be allowed to endorse motions?
I mean, I guess so. I mean, I don't know why they shouldn't be able to. I mean, if what was a current was if they weren't allowed to endorse emotions, if I don't know, if ICE getting society posts we support BDS, or like the Warwick police come and shut them down, or if they say we support the A46 getting abolished or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I guess an issue which might come of this is that I get a sense that I mean, this is a sense I get not just with like student politics, but like just a lot of kind of internal party politics anyways, but like a lot of it is inconsequential and to a degree narcissistic and doesn't really have much bearing on anything, but it's just an excuse for people to kind of aggressively express their opinions, like, oh, this society supports this motion. But again, if everyone had my mentality, democracies wouldn't function. So I know this isn't a good argument to make, but there's just something slightly ridiculous about the whole kind of SU politics thing looking in from the outside. And I know a lot of my other friends who fit into like the normie category, if you will, share my view.
We've had a comment in from Warwick Uni memes for PR to hating teens. Okay, let's just look at this. The sad fact is, ASV and student council just a distraction. Well, let's raise that question then. Do you guys think that the reality is the real power is held elsewhere? ASV, student council, that's such just a distraction. Or do you think they actually provide meaningful tools for students trying to advocate for things? Cam, what's back to you?
It's the most effective way to get student opinion, because you can do, X-Next consultations, X-Next open letters, X-Next focus groups, but there's nothing. The ASV is the best way to poll every student's opinion. And so in that sense, I think it's a good thing. And I think it's something that can have an impact. And it's something, particularly if there's a large majority for a particular stance, that it can put pressure on the university, because if they're taking a separate position to their students, then it's going to become harder if, a large proportion of the student body in the SU is effectively fighting them. And again, it create a tense situation on campus that the university may seek to try and avoid. Obviously, yes, University Council and the Senate, are the most important decision-making bodies on the university. I think, as well as the SU president, the education officer, I think the DDO also sits on University Council. So I think amongst the three of these officers, I think they have a real mandate to go to these bodies and say, well, this is what the students think. And I think it's a very powerful opinion, especially as students pay $9,000 a year to the university to attend. So perhaps there is need for greater transparency at university level. Maybe that is a motion in itself. If there is an ASV calling for greater transparency of what goes on at University Council, what goes on in the Senate, and the SU would have a real mandate to go to these meetings and say, well, look, this is what students are saying. Students don't feel that they don't necessarily know whether they're getting value for their money simply because there's no transparency. Now, whether the university will make a change, I think is obviously up to the opinion of the full council, which will be mostly university staff. But I think certainly they would be wise to avoid a massive gulf between themselves and their students. I think both in terms of the mood on campus, I think the potential publicity that could come from that. I think so. Yeah, I think it can have an impact. It's, in real opinion, a way to poll students and go to the university and say, look, we have a mandate here from the student body. Up to you now, university, but you've got to also try and keep the students on side.
Yeah, I think final question on this topic then. What is something that should come up come up to all student vote next time? Let's start with you, Arthur, because I know this means nothing to you.
So it's a question. What would motivate me to get?
No,
to
what
get
should what should go up to the all student vote next time? What should the next all student vote be about?
Oh, that's a good question. I think like more. I think more topics like, for example, like online learning. I mean, again, I didn't get involved last time either, but I get the impression from what has been said so far that was like a relatively consequential, debate, and that kind of attracted a lot of attention and participation. I think, again, I don't want to come off like I'm again belittling like Warwick SE supporting sex workers, etc. But again, a lot of these motions, it just feels like students expressing a student opinion, which will invariably get ignored because that's kind of what it is. Well, if there was kind of clear evidence that these SU motions touch issues which affected most or majority or even like a plurality of students, and if there was kind of clear evidence that they were actually consequential, that would motivate me more to get involved.
Yeah. Cam?
You've got to go to the heart of what affects most students, and look at what the SU's done at ASVs before, and look at the changes that have been made. Lecture-free welcome week, the removal of circuit laundry. I think very much if you can almost go on the ground and get the issues that students are very much, again, those bread and butter issues that are affecting students. I think a large part of this, I think, comes from the fact that a lot of the motions that are written, a lot of the motions that pass student council and go to ASV are those that are written by those who are very much within the centre of SU democracy. They know how it all works. They know how they can get motions through. I think there almost has to be a push to almost democratise the writing of motions in the first place. So anyone, whether you're just, a first year student who, doesn't like the fact you don't have dishwashers in your accommodation, for example, or a student who, for example, thinks that parking charges are too high on campus. I know there are a lot of students who don't like the parking charges and the fact they went up this year. So almost make it easier for any student to write a motion. And I think you will get a lot of the things that aren't, as Arthur says, necessarily sort of more political issues, but I think maybe more student-centric, day-to-day issues. And of course, there has to be a room for more political issues to come to the forefront. Students are a very politically engaged body. But I still think you have to have that kind of mix. You have to democratize it, make it easier for, any student, whether they're engaged in SU democracy heavily or not, to be able to put something across. And I think that'll have a real effect both on the sort of motions that are talked about and the turnout.
And finally, Dave.
I'm not sure, to be honest. As in, I agree with Cam. I think stuff that directly affects students will have the best turnout, and that's what the SU is for. It's for representing students. In terms of what sort of motions I think should be put forward, I think those sort of motions. I think in the past there's also been motions like rename like the cop rooms and like its former names. I think, or rename the Dirty Duck, stuff like that. I think maybe had a motion trying to rename one of the establishments on campus. I think that might have a good turnout and is actually good fun. I don't know, as in, yeah, there's a lot of scope for what people can propose in all student vote, and I do agree with Cam that the actual process should be democratized.
Yeah. Well, regardless of what happens, there'll be another all student vote, hopefully around this time next term. But until then, let's talk about the Labour Party.
I mentioned earlier on Labour hadn't had its best week, and one of the reasons for that was there was a leaked report on Labour values, which talked about the importance of the union flag, dressing smartly, supporting veterans. Do you, by and large, think that to win back working class support, you need to be a more patriotic, more obviously patriotic party?
Of course we need to be a patriotic party. I find it pretty surprising that people think it's sort of controversial that Keir Starmer would appear with a Union Jack. He wants to be the Prime Minister of the country. But what is our patriotism? Our patriotism actually, at this moment, for me, my patriotism is the incredible pride I have in how the British people have responded to this crisis. But I see the contrast between that and the way our country is run. Our public services that have been diminished and underfunded, key workers who are underpaid in our country, a welfare safety net that has massive holes in it, and the task in the years ahead, is to match the spirit of the British people with the kind of country we need to be. That's what.
Now, Keir Starmer appears to have a patriotism problem. Recently, Labour leaders taken to appearing behind, in front of a Union Jack when giving speeches, and a report was leaked last week from the Labour Party saying that they need to focus on patriotism, flags, and veterans, or to win back Northern voters. Now, his patriotism problem is twofold. On one half the problem is it seems half the country doesn't think he's patriotic enough, and the other half the problem is half the Labour Party thinks he's far too patriotic. Well, maybe that's the wrong word for it. They think he's too ostentatious about it. Panel, I want to ask you, does Labour need to appeal more to the flag wave sounds wrong too. Does Labour need to appeal more to people who like flags in order to win or win the next election? Arthur, let's start with you.
I've got two things to say about this. First, I don't think it's a message, but it's a messenger. I mean, again, there's like a mentality among I feel like a lot of kind of Labour elites, if you will, that if we put Keir Starmer in front of a flag, the patriotic working class will come running. Well, I think most people can kind of intuit that this isn't completely sincere, that it is a calculation made by, let's face it, I mean, I'm saying this for myself, a bunch of posh North Londoners saying, oh, how can we appeal to those left behinds? Let's put a flag up. There's something just somewhat contrived and cynical about it, which I think ultimately won't. I mean, I think it might give them some of a boost, but I think if voters look at who's more genuinely patriotic, it's quite clear that Boris Johnson's Conservatives, and I feel like I'm not saying that as a yes, go Boris, but it's just clear that the Labour Party being a kind of nationalist patriotic party is ultimately going to be somewhat facetious because most of the infrastructure and most of the base is not there. And as such, well, that's that then. But it's got to be, you've got to have the right message and the right messenger. Also, secondly, I think maybe taking another position, I do think a lot of this conversation has been overblown. I mean, sure, Keir Starmer has, he hasn't been particularly inspiring, and I think most people recognise that during the leadership election. I mean, he's a boring politician. He was head of the prosecutor's office. What do you expect? But at the same time, it's only been 6 or even less. It's been maybe a year. I don't know. It's been that's destroying my whole sense of time. It's been a year since he was. My apologies. It's been only a year since he's been elected, and I think a lot of the kind of, again, the Twitter discourse is very overblown. It's oh, Keir Starmer had a bad PMQs. It's over. The guns are out. We need to, there might be a leadership contest, but it's slow down. He's doing quite well in the polls. There's 4 more years until the next election. I don't think you need to be absolutely conclusive yet. I think we should still wait for, maybe another year or two to see how things play out. But the problem is that, Twitter kind of instills congenital short-termism in everyone who engages with it. And that includes most of the kind of the journalistic and policy-making elite in both political parties.
Arthur, firstly, don't worry. I have a worse breakdown on this show every single week. Secondly, Dave, I want to ask you then, are rumors of Keir Starmer's political death greatly exaggerated, or is it time for? Is he well and truly done for?
I think he's doing a decent job, to be honest. As in, his job is to provide constructive opposition, and that is what he is doing. I think you've got to admire him in that he's not been opposing literally every single one of the government's policies, and I think that is something which opposition shouldn't be doing. And I think that he has, and I think that it's time of national crisis, and he has helped a bit in helping the country come together and go behind some of the government's policies. Yes, he has criticised some of them, but he has also openly backed some of the policies, and I think that's something which has to be done. But I do think he's doing a good job. As someone who's from the north, I think that he's got to do a bigger job up here. As in, he's from London. I think there's a lot of the idea that the Labour Party is London-centric, as Arthur said, that especially under Corbyn, but still to some extent in this current opposition. And maybe putting a flag behind him when he speaks might help appeal to some northern voters a bit more. I don't know, but I agree. I think it shouldn't be a calculated thing, which it seems to be, but maybe it's a move in the right direction to appeal to the core voters.
Yeah. Well, then, Cam, would you say then that on flag waving with Keir Starmer, it's the right message but the wrong messenger?
Owen Jones put it really well when he tweeted about this leak on last Tuesday night, when he said that the problem that the Labour Party have at the moment is they don't really know the group that they're going for. I think one of the things about the strategy with flags and veterans is it's very much, I think, a direct sort of trying to show a completely direct opposite to Jeremy Corbyn, who on the national security question, on the defence question in particular, was someone who was, by a large part, especially these traditional working class northern voters, was almost seen as the worst possible option. This was someone who, had called groups like Hamas, Hezbollah his friends. He signed early day motions for the IRA in the past. So this is, Jeremy Corbyn was very much someone who many people felt they couldn't trust on national security. And that was really very much seen as his biggest weakness. And so this I see is very much the direct opposite of that. And I think it may have some impact, but Owen Jones, I think, was sort of in his tweet, kind of was very right when he said, and I think following on the point that Arthur was making, this doesn't necessarily feel sincere, because a lot of these voters now have gone over to the Conservative Party. They're more likely to stick with them now they've done it once. So Labour really have to make an appeal that they are, these voters for the working class. And yeah, I think it will be a good look, but you've got to remember the roots of the Labour Party's issues. They very much lie in the internal divisions that they've had, and they've been brewing for 20 years. Start the support in those seats in the Northeast and the Midlands started to fall away under Blair, and then accelerated quite significantly post-Brexit and with Jeremy Corbyn. Keir Starmer's got an uphill task to win them back. And I think he needs to embrace something that does make the Labour Party look more outwardly patriotic, because, the alternative is really not a good look for Labour, and I think definitely won't win them back, because to completely disavow it, as Richard Burgon, who was Jeremy Corbyn's Shadow Justice Secretary, did when he saw the report, he tweeted and he said that, this strategy is symptomatic of one which goes chasing votes from groups who already have their own party, the Conservative Party. So fundamentally, the Labour Party have to show that they are patriotic, that they are, if they are going to win these voters back, because to completely disavow it is to almost play into the Conservatives' hands, and the Conservatives can just go, well, they've not learned from all of these lessons, Jeremy Corbyn and the national security issue. But because the issues of Labour's decline have very much been starting with Blair, I think very much both in the sort of the policies, perhaps of economic liberalisation that, people in the North have felt left behind, but also perhaps the sort of social liberal policies that perhaps these traditional working class voters and some of their more conservative attitudes feels they kind of clash with. Labour can't exactly disavow the flag waving patriotic strategy per se, but they need to embrace it. They need to make it sincere. So whether that's something like talking up military spending, for example, there's a real opportunity, for example, on Trident, which was an issue where Jeremy Corbyn really struggled on, because whilst the party was very pro-Trident, he himself had said many times he didn't support the continuation of the nuclear deterrent, and almost had to not be forced into it, but very much had to take the position of the party on that. I think if he can make a stronger line on something like that, then that's a way to winning these voters back. But yeah, I think Labour need to spend a lot more time working out the priorities of these voters. This is not the only thing that's going to win them back.
Yeah. Well, again, I guess this is sort of last questions here then. Do you guys think that Keir Starmer can win back these voters? He can reunify the wings of the party, the sort of metropolitan London-focused elites, I suppose, and the more northern left-behind voters who switched Conservative in the last election? Let's start with you, Dave, and we'll go to you, Arthur.
I think he can do it. But I think, to be honest, he's a party that's in opposition. I think if he wins the next election, it's going to be more down to the failings of the Conservative Party. If Conservative Party screw up COVID recovery and Brexit, then I think he's a shoo-in for victory. In terms of, I think that's what you've got to remember when you consider the opposition. It tends to be that they win because the opposition screws up. So yeah, I do think he can do it. When he was elected leader, I didn't think he was the best person, to be honest, simply because he's just another Londoner. But you never know. I think he could do it.
And Arthur?
It's a good question. Honestly, I don't know. What I will say is that I think the key here is, I mean, this might sound corny, but it's about kind of striking up the right aesthetic, the right vibe. On what Cam was saying, I don't necessarily think it was specifically Corbyn saying, I oppose Trident, or specifically him saying I'm friends with Hamas. It was the general image that all this kind of aggregation of various strange positions kind of presented a mealy-mouthed socialist kind of vegan North London weirdo. I think it's more. I don't think this election will be determined upon whether Keir Starmer stands in front of a flag, kind of says in the most abstract way possible, I love Britain, I love the flag, when it's just a completely artificial creation. I think it's really a question of can Keir Starmer kind of generate a feeling, an aesthetic around him and his platform that really galvanizes people. And I mean, I know I was defending him a few minutes ago because I said it was too early, but at the same time, I don't think it's a Keir Starmer. I think I just when I look at the current Labour Party, I don't really think there's anyone with like the gravitational pull who you'd need to not only reverse, a huge defeat at the hand of the Conservatives, but also the SNP problem. That the SNP is still polling at like 50% in Scotland. Like, I mean, does Labour have to go into coalition with the SNP and perennial independence referendums, blah blah? That's a whole other issue which he needs to deal with. So yeah, if I think to push him over the edge from like just winning some seats back and getting a hung parliament, actually winning a big majority, kind of bridging that gap will require something special, and I'm not sure if Keir Starmer possesses it.
All right. Politics is more of a vibe. I think that's a perfect note to leave this story on. And now this.
In this economy, obviously, people are going to have to move around the country. And for a lot of people, railways remain a relatively environmentally friendly way of doing that. But your co-leader, Jonathan Bartley, has described HS2 as an act of ecocide. There are 9 protesters now underground at Euston. People are risking their lives as they are risking their lives trying to get them out again. Is that the kind of action that you support as leader of the Green Party?
I'm incredibly worried about the safety of those protesters, and they absolutely have a right to protest, and it's important that people are kept safe when they do that as well. Now, on HS2 more widely, we are against this project, and that does confuse a lot of people because we're not against railways. We want to see more railways, but this project has got out of hand. The excessive speed, the fact that it can only go in more or less straight lines, the fact that it's bypassing city centres, all of that is leading to these problems of attacking the ancient woodlands, of going through these very, very sensitive landscapes that people are putting their lives on the line. Their people are going.
There we have it. The leader of the Green Party attacking building trains. HS2 fast, HS2 furious. Let's discuss HS2, which feels very weird to do HS2 in 2021. I remember I did on my very first show we discussed HS2, and we mostly assumed it would never be finished. And then COVID happened, and here we are. Well, let's talk about it. Is HS2 worth it at this point? After all the protests, all the raised costs, all the delays, is HS2 still worth it? Cam, let's start with you.
So personally, I support HS2. I think the fact that as part of, firstly, climate change, I think as part of a levelling up strategy, something like a high-speed rail line that allows you to get easier from the capital to the north, to regions like Manchester, to Leeds, I think it could be a positive, and it has many other impacts. For example, if you have a high-speed rail line, there's less of an incentive, for example, to use domestic air travel. That will help the environment in the long run. The biggest problem with HS2 is that the costs have just spiraled. out of control. And this, I think, has been a real slightly bad example of government inefficiency, especially over the last decade, where the rhetoric economically from the government has been, we need to make efficiency savings, we're going through austerity because we need to cut the deficit. And then you have a project like HS2 that spirals out of control on the budget. I think it's now 4 times, I think, what was originally estimated. So I think in terms of where we are, I think we've gone too far in to come back out. And I think most people, I think Boris Johnson, when he said, I think it was late January last year, that he wants to go ahead with HS2, that it's coming. I think fundamentally we have to stick with it. You know, high-speed rail is something that is in many other developed economies in the world. It's something, you know, it's really useful to move people between urban areas very quickly. You can have a lot of trade and a lot of stuff taking place a lot easier. But the costs are a concern. And I think there has to be much more of a cost-benefit analysis. There has to be much more, I think, regulation in terms of ensuring that the costs aren't spiraling out of control, whether that's something with the contractors who are building it. But we've reached a stage where it's too fast to go. We just need to keep the costs down.
Dave, what do you think?
I love HS2, to be honest. Like, I agree with Cam, it is expensive, but we're too far in to back out. As someone who's from Leeds, as I like to mention a lot, it would help a lot, as in terms of, I think it would cut by about an hour the time to get from Leeds to London. I know that is sort of a later phase of HS2, but I think it's got a few benefits. One, housing costs are ridiculous in London, and if it means people can commute from other cities a lot easier, then they'll happily live in those other cities, and it could have a positive benefit on housing costs. But also just in helping to link up the whole country with each other. Yes, it's linking cities with London, but I do think the country is London-centric, and we've got to accept that. But I think we're the only country, like one of many countries in the world, not to have like high-speed rail. Like, by countries, I mean like developed countries. And yeah, I think it is something that the country does need. I agree with Cam, we should try to limit costs as much as possible, but yeah.
I don't think anyone said I agree with Cam that much on this show ever. So I think this is a record, the most agreement with Cam ever had. Arthur, what do you think?
We're going a slight tangent. So there's this medieval Islamic philosopher called Ibn Khaldun, who basically theorizes that kind of each society goes through multiple stages. So at the start, he wrote this in about the 14th century or 15th century. You have the kind of tribes who are kind of dynamic and have this thing called asabiya, which is kind of tribal solidarity, which kind of translates into efficacy, which allows them to kind of conquer other tribes and nations and take action. You can see about how Genghis Khan kind of swept through Eurasia and conquered all these decadent countries, you know, all these decadent civilizations just weren't expecting a dynamic tribal kind of society to just sweep them away. But however, once those tribal societies take over these sophisticated civilizations with their thriving intellectual cultures, they eventually, this is going somewhere, I promise, they kind of become a problem themselves. They become these kind of decadent urban societies which become incapable of doing anything and just get absorbed in their malaise, and they in turn eventually get dominated by a new dynamic tribal society that's used to a life of hardship. About hardship engenders solidarity. The reason I say all of this because I feel like Britain has lost all its asabiya. We are a decadent late-stage society, right, just crumbling and cannot do anything. Like, how long have you been talking about doing HS2? Even more, how long have you been talking about doing Heathrow Terminal 3? Like, I get, like, we're not communist China. There are checks and balances which infrastructure projects need to go through. But the sheer length of time and the sheer bureaucratic just corruption and just prevarication which kind of characterizes every kind of marginally ambitious infrastructure project is just crushing to watch. And I've just come to a view that I think, like, as a country, we've lost the capacity to do anything like this anymore. Even, you could say, you know, even at, like, towards World War II, when, you know, the age of Pax Britannica was coming to a close, there was still that kind of dynamic instinct which kind of led to the creation of a welfare state and blah blah blah. Now there's no, again, I don't mean to say, you know, all is a loss, but there's just like a moribundity and there's just a lack of killer instincts, which I mean, which I know I think everyone's a victim of, me included. I'm completely lethargic, and I have no efficacy to do anything apart from sit in my ass and write prospectus articles. But I just think this inability to like kind of effectuate any big infrastructure project is symptomatic of just a broader social cultural malaise, and it's only going to get worse. HS2 won't be finished until 2045. That's my hot take.
Okay, there were going to be more questions, but I don't think I can top that as a response to anything here. I think that's it. That's World about HS2. Thank you everyone for tuning in. It's been an absolutely wonderful audience. I just want to say one thing. This week is Raw's Charity Week. We're doing a variety of events to raise money for the British Heart Foundation, like an online gaming stream, Dare to Donate, Warwick Idol, and my personal favourite, because I'm producing it, Late Night Chat with Julianne, which will take place this Thursday. Please do follow Raw on all social media to keep up to date with what we're doing, and please get involved and do donate. It's for a very, very good cause. But this is me signing off. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to everyone watching at home. It's been a wonderful show. And I'll see you when I see you.